Here is the sign-up sheet for April 30th confirmation and reception. So if you haven't signed up yet, I know that most of you have. And Tess, I put you on, the information you already gave me. So you can check it and make sure, but you're the second one on there. And, yep, you can pass that around. Today is the day that I should have written the board all in advance, but we're doing that together since we don't have a board yet, so that's okay. Are you up there, Bruce? There you are. Oh, do I need to test anything here? Are we? All right. All right, we're running slightly behind because it's Palm Sunday. And the crazy rector decided to do this anyway on Palm Sunday. Most years I've skipped Palm Sunday, but then we're doing it after Easter and it gets all confusing. So I thought, let's just go straight through.
Can you move to center?
Can I move to center?
We
Sure.
have palms in the way of the camera.
Oh, of course.
Thanks very much.
Yes. Yes, I have really had trouble seeing you all today from up here. I'm going. All right, so let's start with if there's anything left over that you want to bring up from any of the other classes would be good. I'm going to start, so we're going to talk about denominations today and where that all stands in the Christian world, and try to give you some sense of where most denominations are coming from now. But I want to start by doing that historically and showing you where everybody came from and how we got all these many denominations that we have. So I'm going to draw that up for you when the board gets here. But before we do that, just checking in to see if you have anything left over from previous classes that we want to talk about. Wow, you guys, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're all on YouTube, right, Bruce? And Facebook, both. Okay, so if you go to our regular Facebook or YouTube site, they're all up. Okay. Lisa.
So something occurred to me.
Oh, look, it's partway up from last year. Yes. Yep, we're gonna flip it. Go ahead. I'll just fill in the missing pieces. I can't believe that's still on the board from last year. That shows you how many classes we're having now. That's, before COVID, we had a class every single week. Yep. So anyway, we'll get back to that at some point. Go ahead, Lisa, sorry.
Well, something occurred to me, and that is that I'm currently reading Bishop Curry's book, Love is the Way.
Uh-huh.
And it occurred to me, I really like it if we would invite him to Grace St. Paul's Church and come and visit us.
If you'd like it, if we invited Bishop Curry here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like that too. But
and
he's kind of a busy guy.
Well, I figured that, but the last I read, I don't think he's come out west yet. He
was at our diocese last year.
Oh, was he? Okay.
Yeah, he did our keynote at convention not this year, the year before.
Okay. So can we do that?
Well, we can try, but he has enough trouble getting to all the diocesan events.
Well, we could offer him an agape hug.
All right, we need to think of something to offer him. Okay.
Here.
Yeah, we can try that. Let's see. So I think I mentioned you all last week or the week before that that our previous presiding bishop, Catherine Jefferts Shorey, actually is supporting us. She sent us money this year. So I think we might be able to get Catherine here because she really knows what we're doing and is doing all she can to encourage us. So, which makes me very happy. And she's a very cool person on lots of levels. Can you see that? Can you not see it? I'm trying to figure out what I had here so I don't have to redo it all. I got that word. Slavic. Oh, Armenia, that's what that is. Balkan. Cyprus. Well, I don't know what that is, but Serbs would go there. Okay. All right. What is this mess? Oh, ELCA. Senate. Lutheran. I better write that over. What? American. Southern.
We can't read it. It needs to be one of the new ones.
What? You mean what I'm writing you can't read?
No, we can't read it.
But you can read the stuff from a year ago?
It's awfully light. There's a new pack. James just
What would you like me to use?
one that works.
Well, I'm using.
Yeah, your choice on color.
All right. All right. No problem. I was just trying to save some time here.
It might not erase terribly well.
In a second, I'm going to turn it over and start over. All right, tell me if this is any better, and then I'll start over.
All right.
A what? Yes,
Who needs new glasses?
yes. Oh, I have Calvinist right there. Daggone it. Well, it was a decent idea. Oh, that's not true. Methodist. All right. Did I lose Lisa? She what? She's returning, okay. All right. So when we talk about denominations now, the first thing is, of course, in the Western world, we always forget this. We always forget half the church. So I think it's really important for us to remember that that the Eastern Church exists and is a major part of Christianity, and at this moment probably has more members in it than the Western Church. So I think that's important to remember. If you remember going back to our first history class, we talked about during the Nicene Creed, and that the Eastern Church were the ones that really came up with the solution to how we were going to figure out how we were going to have a Trinitarian God and have three people in it and all that stuff. It was the Eastern Church's thought process that really saved the day in that whole conversation. And I'm going to suggest from the very beginning, certainly from the 3rd century on, the theology in the Eastern Church and the Western Church was already very, very different. And we also talked about the fact that as Episcopalians, when it comes to things like original sin and baptism, we are actually closer to the Eastern Church in thought process than the Western Church. And things kind of mix because of that. The official split of the churches came in 1054. That's when there was a patriarch and a pope, and things actually got split in half. But theologically, I would suggest that split really occurred in at least the 4th century and maybe earlier, because the thought process really was way different. Have any of you ever been to an Orthodox church? Oh, look at a lot of you. Okay. So tell us something about it.
I was in the Russian Orthodox one in Alaska,
Okay.
and there were no seats.
Yeah, that's very typical.
Everybody stood,
Yep.
and the priest had his back to us.
Yeah, that's true too. So the Eastern Church tries to capture the ancient church as best they can, and of course, in the ancient church, nobody sat down, nobody kneeled either, which is an interesting thing. Kneeling did not occur in the church until the Middle Ages. So you will notice that your rector rarely kneels in church. I do it on Good Friday and Ash Wednesday, and that's it, because people didn't kneel in the old days. They stood. They stood for the whole service, and the Orthodox have tried to hold on to that. It's anybody else? Any other who have had an Orthodox experience? Edwin? Yeah, we need to get you the microphone. Lots of incense, yeah. So that's what Edwin said there. So yeah, smells and bells are really important in most Orthodox churches, as they are in some of our churches too. But remember that it's a lot about mystery in the Eastern Church. You're not trying to explain everything so much theologically. It's about capturing the fact that we don't get it, that this is a mysterious thing. So all of these churches fell on the Eastern side. So we have all the Orthodox churches, of course, Syrian, Russian, and Greek. I feel compelled to bring up that, the Russian Orthodox Patriarch came out in favor of the attack on Ukraine. So you take that for what it's worth, okay, and what's going on there. But the Orthodox Church in Russia did an awful lot for centuries to stay alive, and they sometimes connected in ways that maybe we're not too excited about either. Thank you, Elizabeth.
My parents, well, I spent my early years in Augusta, Georgia, which has a large Greek Orthodox population.
Okay.
And one of my parents' friends, actually, my first Bible was a Greek Orthodox Bible. And it is very different from our canonized Bible. A lot of the Apocrypha is in there. Like you said, a lot of the mystery stuff is in
Right.
there.
Right. Yep. Good point. Thank you. Thank you. Yep. Good. All right. So those are the churches within the Eastern tradition. So all the Orthodox, Syrian, Russian, and Greek, and the Melkites and the Jacobites and the Maronites and all those Ite people are usually Orthodox. Armenia, Serbia, the whole Byzantine Empire, Ethiopia is an Orthodox church. We have there's a lot of crossover in things that are happening in Ethiopia and in the Western Church, but those are all Orthodox, okay? All right, then we get to our mess. So we did this in the history, so you know Western Christendom was basically represented by Rome and continued that way until the Protestant Reformation. And the first break there was the Lutheran Church. And the other major break in the Reformation was the Calvinist tradition, okay? Out of the Calvinist church came the Presbyterian tradition, the Anabaptist tradition. Forget that for a second. And those are the biggest breaks from the Reformation. And then other churches started forming out of that. Okay, sorry, I forgot this one. So Rome, Lutheran, Calvinistic, and Anglican. And Anglican, remember, happened way after these because it didn't really happen until Elizabeth I. And that's when that tradition started forming. So out of the Anglican Church came the Methodist tradition. Methodism came out of the Episcopal tradition here. John and Charles Wesley, those folks. It was a much more evangelical take on what was happening in the very stiff Anglican tradition, you know, where you sat like this in church. So I think it's kind of interesting to see how all that happened. So, you know, a lot of Presbyterians I know today don't even want to associate themselves with the Calvinist tradition. But part of the church does, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Now, way, way, way after all of these came the Pentecostal tradition and the fundamentalist tradition. And I'll take that back. I'll see if Edwin is going to disagree with me about this. But I would suggest that it was the Azusa Street Revival in 1905 when that actually was the advent of the Pentecostal and fundamentalist tradition. Yeah.
Azusa was a suburb of Los Angeles, so that's why it's important. You need to put those two together.
So what I want you to realize here is that whole tradition is very, very new. It does not have a lot of history behind it, and it was a very much American movement, spreading from America. So out of that tradition came the Assembly of God Church, the Nazarene Church, lots of Pentecostal traditions, et cetera, okay? So today, a lot of that doesn't make a whole lot of difference because the difference in denominations now mostly occurred during the split in the Civil War. And remember, I mentioned that the Episcopal Church was the only one, for better or worse, that stayed together of the main denominations during the Civil War. But everybody else split in half. So the Presbyterian Church now, there is what is called the PCA half of the Presbyterian Church and the USA half. The PCA part is more Calvinistic and connected with fundamentalism. The USA is what we refer to as a mainline church, which would be very similar to where the Episcopal Church is right now. The Lutheran Church broke into what is now ELCA, Episcopal Lutheran Church in America, and the synods, so the Missouri Synod, help me out here. Wisconsin Synod.
Wisconsin, ELCA are the three biggies.
Right. So the synods are also much more attached to this tradition, and the ELCA, as you all know, I think you all know, we have a concordat with the Lutheran Church, and we are now so close together that we can serve in each other's churches. So some of you know that our last pastor here, Kimberly Law, was a Lutheran, and she served here, and she is still serving at Episcopal churches in Colorado right now. So we can switch back and forth now. That concordat is that tight now. There are still some people concerned about some of the apostolic succession stuff, but we're together, so that's cool. Edwin?
Is there talks about expanding it?
Expanding to ecumenism to other denominations?
Yeah, the concordat.
Yeah. There's the talks. There's always talks going on, trying to get other churches involved in that mix. We're really close to Church of the Brethren. Has anybody ever heard of Church of the Brethren, experienced it? Okay, from East Coast, obviously. So Church of the Brethren and the Episcopal Church are really close in theology, and we've had talks with them. We've had talks with the Methodist tradition, but they're having their own problems right now, so I don't know when that's going to happen.
When did the concordat occur between the ELCA and the Episcopal Church?
When did that concordat happen? Okay. It's been at least 10 years.
Okay.
It's longer than that? Okay. That's what happens when you get old.
Yeah.
Okay. So 15 years maybe?
What was important was joining ministerial groups in neighborhoods. So I had a lot of Black Baptists in the ministerial association I belonged to in Omaha.
Okay, let's talk about that one. Yeah.
Plus me,
Yeah.
plus a Methodist minister. So it was all kind of, that's what pulled things together ecumenically.
Okay. And remember, when we talked historically, the Episcopal Church has been in the center of ecumenism for a long, long time. We've tried to connect with other churches. We have conversations with the Catholics all the time, too. I don't know that that's ever going to happen ever, because we've got some major issues there. But who knows?
It was August 19th, 1999.
Thank you very much. We have heard from the voice from the sky. It was 1999. So that's 24 years. Gosh, I'm old. Okay, so yeah, so it's still happening. So we didn't talk about Baptists. So the Baptist tradition split in half, and now there's the Southern Baptist Church and the American Baptist Church. The American Baptist Church is mainline. My spiritual director, who I've talked about a few times, was American Baptist. We're very much in the same group. So all of those churches, the Presbyterian USA, the ELCA Lutheran Church, the Methodist, the main part of the Methodist Church that is now allowing gay people to serve that part of the Methodist Church, because they're doing the split right now as we speak. And the American Baptist Church, all of those are on that. The UCC Church, the Disciples of Christ, all of those churches are what we would consider what we call mainline churches. So our theology is relatively similar, and we do things different liturgically, but most of those connect. And then the other ones I mentioned, Presbyterian PCA, the Synods in the Lutheran Church, the Southern Baptist Church, those are all out of this tradition, okay? So that is the biggest difference in denominations now. Actually, denominations are much closer than they've ever been before. The biggest split is this thing between the evangelical church and what we're calling the mainline church. Yes, sir.
It's the lectionary. We all use the same lectionary, Presbyterians, Methodists,
Good point,
Catholics,
good
Lutherans, and so on. So with some variations depending on which branch of all that one is part of, but basically the same lectionary.
Yeah, thanks for that. So if you go in a UCC church or a Disciples of Christ church or an Episcopal church on a Sunday, chances are very good that we will all be doing the same readings because we all use what's called the Revised Common Lectionary. And it took us a long time to do this. I switched to the Revised Common Lectionary 21 years ago, but the Episcopal Church came doing it much later than that. But all of us now do that. There are some other lectionaries out there now. There's a woman's lectionary that we might mess around with in the future and some other things. But the great thing about the Revised Common Lectionary is we're all doing the same thing. And that's very cool. So some of you know that I am in an ecumenical lectionary group here in town, and we meet together to talk about the lessons and what we're going to do with them and just share with each other. We came together because we were all sanctuary churches. We were all churches that were physically housing someone in sanctuary, and we came together to support one another in that, and that gradually grew into this lectionary group. Bart Smith at St. Mark's Presbyterian and I started that group, but we had people from Disciples of Christ and UCC and Lutheran and a couple Presbyterian USA churches, and anyway, we all got together and did that together. So that's very cool that we can do that. And that's the biggest way to understand churches these days. It's very possible you could walk in a UCC church and have a closer experience to what you would have here than in another Episcopal church, because you get what I'm saying, that it's the mainline thing and the evangelical thing that's the main difference now. And that's the other thing we need to try to fix. Tess?
Couple of questions. So basically, the biggest difference between the mainline and the conservative Christianity is that obviously the evangelical would fall under the conservative faith type of tradition, whereas mainline would be more in tune with the progressive Christian direction, right? Would that be the biggest difference that we're looking at?
Yeah, I was trying to avoid those words, but yes, yes, that is the difference.
Okay.
Elizabeth?
So I'm wondering if you can differentiate three terms for me:
Okay.
Pentecostal, fundamentalist, and evangelical.
Yeah, sure, let's do that. That's a good idea. And Edwin, you can help me with this if I go astray, okay? Okay, so Pentecostal was the first one. Pentecostal is a spirit-filled tradition that experiences God. Gosh, I can't even see half of you now. that especially experiences God through the Spirit and happenings of the Spirit. So in the Pentecostal tradition would be Assembly of God churches, the Nazarene Church. I would say the Church of God in Christ is mostly Pentecostal. Is that fair, Edwin? Okay. So they're very Spirit-driven churches, Elizabeth, and they started in that Azusa Street revival in 1905. Okay. Fundamentalism is the name of the original group of folks who came up with the 5 fundamentals that were necessary for salvation. And I know what you're going to ask me next. What are the 5 fundamentals? So Lyman and Milton Stewart were the folks that originally wrote this tract called The Fundamentals, a testimony to the truth. They wrote them in 1909, and those 5 fundamentals were, number 1, that the miracles that happened were real, miracles of Jesus Christ were literal and real, that Jesus was born literally from a virgin. Substitutionary atonement is the 3rd one, that what we were talking about today in church, that Jesus died for our sins, and that because of the blood that Jesus gave up, that because that blood was spilled, we can be saved. Okay? Substitutionary atonement, that Jesus dies for your sins so that you can be saved. Number 4, the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ, that Jesus was in the Easter event, physically went into another plane of existence. And number 5, the inerrancy of Scripture, that Scripture is literally correct, word for word, as it's written, historically and every other way, okay? Those are the 5 fundamentals. That was a reaction to what was going on in the rest of the church, where we were suggesting, I shouldn't have said we there, sorry, where that part of the tradition was concentrating on connecting with science and what was going on in the world. Think about Charles Darwin, all of that stuff. What was going on in Germany with the idea of biblical criticism, that we can read the Bible as a book and not just as a piece of scripture, and learn more from it by looking at its social and historical context. All that happened back in the 1700s and the 1800s, and fundamentalism was a reaction to that. Oh, no, none of that's right. It's these 5 fundamentals, and that's it, okay? Fundamentalism, so 1909 is when that started, Elizabeth, and that's when the big split in the Christian church started happening around that. So folks in that fundamentalist camp started building their own seminaries and teaching people these 5 things and not much else. Very, very, very heavy biblical emphasis in the seminaries, whereas in the seminaries, in the mainline tradition, it was a broader view of the world and what was going on around. So we had classes around pastoral care and lots of other things, and we don't need to go into all that, okay? So the fundamentalist movement was a defense against higher criticism, and it was a response to that, and that's how it all formed. So the evangelical movement, and I hope this is fair, Edwin, stop me if it's not, I would suggest that that there is no difference between fundamentalism and what we now call the evangelical movement. At some point, the word fundamentalism became pejorative to the folks that were in it, and they found it unhelpful to describe who they were anymore, and people heard it pejoratively. So the word was just kind of dropped, and it was replaced with evangelical. Which is really kind of unfortunate because of course we're an evangelical church. I hope we are, and evangelical was a much broader term before that, and it was seen in many fashions, but at that point they kind of took the word, and now the evangelical church is synonymous with fundamentalism, and they don't use that word anymore. Is that fair? Okay, all right. Yep. Go ahead. Okay. Let's get that to... I'll get it back to you.
So, where is the Unitarian Church in this?
Okay. Yeah, so let's pick up all those things, and then let's fill in this piece, Edwin. So Unitarian Universalists are not Christian in that sense, so they're not on this chart of Christianity, because they have a much broader view of the world beyond Christianity, and they don't have that connection to Jesus. So they're not on the chart at all because they're not Christian. And but if they were going to be on the chart, it would be with us. And I have lots of Unitarian Universalist friends, one of whom saved my butt when I was in Page, Arizona, who stood up for me when everybody else was beating me up. So philosophically and in some ways theologically, they would definitely fall on the side of the mainline tradition, but because they're not Christian per se, they're not on the chart. Okay?
Thank you.
Yep.
One of the differences I want to highlight between evangelicals and Pentecostals is that a lot of evangelicals, to throw out like just a theological, what am I trying to say? A seminary word is cessationism, which means that they don't believe in speaking in tongues, and sort of mystical encounters or experiences. They believe that seceded, hence the word cessationism, with the early church, that was a thing in the past. Whereas Pentecostals would argue that no, that actually carries over into today. So there's some differences between the groups, and I would argue that Pentecostals are actually more theologically diverse than evangelicals, and I think Father Steve was right that evangelicals are probably closer towards fundamentalism.
Thank you, Edwin. That's really, really helpful. And we tend to, in the mainline tradition, kind of put Pentecostal and evangelicals together, and they're not at all. So thank you for bringing that up, Edwin.
Again, I want to go back to the geographic parish neighborhoods. A lot of this doesn't really make any useful sense. We could work with the Trotskyites, for example, in San Francisco on community stuff easily, but not with those who were oriented towards Peking or Moscow. They wouldn't. We could work with...
I see.
You
I see what you're
had to
saying.
do with what they were willing to do, and when to know when to keep your mouth shut. So as not to stuff beans up people's noses needlessly. That was also an important thing. Things just shift considerably once you get down to a parish level and have to look at things differently.
Yeah, thanks.
I have a question about Pentecostal and Spirit-filled tradition. And I'm wondering, I have a cousin and her husband who's no longer living, but they showed me a video of one of their church sessions. And they would have people, and people would come up to the front, and I don't know if they were touched by whoever director or whatever his title was, and lots of emotion, and then it was a healing thing, and then this person who had come up would pass out and supposedly be healed. And Terry told me that they actually have catchers assigned so that when people fall over, is that Pentecostal?
Yep. I mean, that's part of it, yeah.
Wow, that kind of blew my mind, having grown up Episcopalian.
Yeah, so, I mean, they really stress Pentecost and the Spirit-driven part of church. And, we suck at that, to be perfectly honest. We have one day of Pentecost, 50 days from Easter, and we talk about the Spirit, and we have balloons in church, and we do little things with things floating in the air and wind and stuff, and then we forget all about the Holy Spirit. The Pentecostal tradition never forgets about the Holy Spirit. That's what everything is always about. So it's very Holy Spirit driven. I would say the evangelical tradition is very Jesus driven, and it's a different emphasis. So
my mother went to, I think, one of these kind of services, and I'm talking like she confessed to me this before she died. She had, I forget the name of it, in her shoulder. And she felt that she actually was healed with this.
Yeah.
Physically, she was healed. And she was embarrassed about it because she was an Episcopalian too.
Yeah, so I'm not going there. I'm not suggesting that somebody's not being healed in a Spirit-driven church. So, yeah, I mean, who knows? Yep. Thank you. All right, I'm going to fill in some of these other churches when we get there. Go ahead, Sandy.
I think one of the happy differences in particularly following my friend's study of climate change and ecology is that the evangelicals are quite dedicated to the earth. And that is not something that is necessarily shared with a lot of the fundamentalist churches. And that goes along with my point two, which is a lot of these differences change from church to church.
Yeah, that's true.
They don't change, from the body to the body. Somewhat, they are influenced by the body.
Which was your point. Yeah.
But the individual church, I can speak better to the UCC because it's what I know. You can have two UCC churches in one town. One may have roots in the Congregational, and the other may have roots in the German Reformed. And if you serve one and then the other, there's really a world of difference.
Yeah.
So the individual church makes such a big difference that when I came out here as a UCC person, I just could not find a home till I got here. So it has an awful lot to do with individual congregations.
You bet. Thanks for that, Sandy. All right, I want to fill in some of these other churches that we haven't talked about. We haven't really talked about the apocalyptic churches, the churches that are waiting for the end of the world very soon, like the Seventh-day Adventist tradition and the Jehovah's Witness tradition. These are all traditions that started in the 19th century in America, and they're very much based in apocalyptic eschatology, that the world's going to end. So there's that whole group of churches too. Now, again, individual churches, you just don't know. So, for example, I went to our parish administrator's Jehovah Witness church, which is a black church, and I never heard a word about apocalyptic stuff, not a word. So it was much more evangelical. So things change in place to place. But I want to give you a sense of each of the traditions.
Just to put some of these in historical context, the UCC, which was formed from other existing denominations, did not form until 1947.
Yeah.
So it's 75 years old.
That's really
this year.
Recent. Really recent. Yep. I'll bring up Baha'is. Again, not a Christian church, a church that sees many, many different folks as prophets, but in some ways there's some similarities there with us too. I'll bring up Scientology because somebody always asks. So let me just make this really clear. Scientology is not a church. It is a philosophy of life. It has very little to do with religion, certainly from my perspective. And there's a lot of stuff out there about Scientology now. You can watch a fair amount of stuff. But I'll just say I'm not going to put it in any of these categories because it's not a church. It's a way of life. So okay, so I'll throw that out there. So let's talk about some of these churches that formed in the 19th century American church movement. The Disciples of Christ Church was one of them. Very ecumenical in its thought process. The original ideas in Disciples of Christ was that you could boil down Christian doctrine to do you accept Jesus Christ or not? It was not meant to be a church of its own. It was supposed to be an ecumenical movement to bring a lot of churches in, but it ended up, like all of us, forming another denomination. And I have lots of Disciples of Christ friends. The Seventh-day Adventists that we were just talking about, that apocalyptic movement, was started by a man named William Miller. He believed that the world was ending on October 22nd, 1844. Reading the book of Revelation, he calculated the math there and figured that that's what was happening. You all know Seventh-day Adventists because of their fact that they celebrate the Sabbath on Saturday, which I believe they are absolutely right about. Saturday is probably the real Sabbath, and their dietary laws and that kind of thing. But it was formed as an apocalyptic church. Also during that time, the Christian Science Church formed. And we haven't talked about the Christian Science Church. They are very much a mainline church theologically. Most of you know about Mary Baker Eddy starting that church. She was instantly cured after being near death after reading a certain gospel passage. And the Christian Science tradition has a very pantheistic view of the world, that everything is part of God. So we're pretty close to the Christian Science tradition in lots of ways too. But of course, they have a very different understanding of medicine and how that's approached. But that was also formed during that time. The LDS Church was also formed during that time in the 19th century. I think most of you know the LDS story. Joseph Smith was living in upstate New York, and he was approached by two angels, and they left him these golden plates. And then he went home and transcribed these plates. It was in a language no one knew, but he was told how to translate it, so he did. And then that became the Book of Mormon. Those golden plates disappeared, and I think you know the rest of the story. So again, my point is a very, very new, very American church with all of its roots out of that. All right. Jehovah Witnesses, who came up in that same time. Charles Taze Russell was the guy. Jehovah Witnesses is named for the passage in Isaiah 43:10. It's really kind of a mistake of putting the vowels in Jehovah with the consonants in Yahweh to come up with this word. But that's all beside the point. It was a very fire and brimstone kind of approach. It's very apocalyptic. They originally saw the Armageddon happening in 1914, and that was based on Luke 21:24. But that just keeps changing as things go on. Most of you know Jehovah Witnesses from the Watchtower book and the people that come to your door, which is just lovely, or stand under the bridge at the University of Arizona as you're going over to campus and other places. Yeah, I think that's enough of that. We've talked about the Nazarene tradition, which also started in the 19th century out of the Azusa Street revival. There you go. Who do we want to fill in here? The African Methodist Episcopal Church. People always ask about that. There was a group. Let's see. So we go back to the late 1700s. There was a guy named Richard Allen, and most of you have heard of Absalom Jones, who was the first African American priest in the Episcopal Church. But those guys were still sitting in the balcony in Episcopal churches because they were black in the late 1700s. So they tried to come up with a way to live into both the Methodist tradition and the Episcopal tradition for black congregations, so they ended up forming their own church. And again, if you go in in a Methodist Episcopal church now, of course, it's very much part of African American culture, and that's the first thing that you notice being a part of it. But if you go to a black church an Episcopal black church in New Orleans, it looks pretty much the same. And and all of that came out of our tradition too. Okay. What else do you want to talk about denominations or traditions before we talk about where we're going as a church? Anything else? Anybody want to talk about? Elizabeth.
Quakers?
Quakers, thank you. Yeah, Quakers. Quakers. How did I miss Quakers? So the Quaker tradition also started in that same 19th century thing, and it was very much in the Christian Science kind of approach to things, but it started forming around the peace movement and trying to create a tradition that was going to live into that peace movement all the time. And so it's very much a mainline tradition with a very different style of liturgy that I think most of you know about. But theologically, pretty darn similar to the mainline tradition. Good. I'm looking at other people I've forgotten.
Oh, I also wanted to bring up a couple of other things. There's the Unitarian, not the Unitarian, excuse me, the New Thought, Ernest Holmes, and the metaphysical type of belief system in regards to how it relates to the Unity Church, the Unity of Tucson Church.
Yeah, so I don't know a lot about the Unity tradition, other than the fact that it's very, very new. Has anybody ever been to a Unity church?
I have.
Okay.
To Unity of Tucson a couple of times I went.
Okay, tell us, Tess.
So when I went those few times, it wasn't that many times. It was the first time that I went, it was several years ago, and they already had a previous pastor, and he retired, and then they came out with another pastor after, it was like right at the start of the pandemic, and I forgot his name, but he did something that I thought was really, really nice and interesting during that service, and it's where they light a candle for all of the faith traditions to honor them, like Judaism, for example, Islam, Jehovah's Witness, and Christianity, and I thought that was very, very nice.
So in that way, it's a little bit like the Baha'i tradition.
I think so.
It honors all those faith traditions.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I do remember about Unity is that it's very much tied in with the metaphysical philosophy and belief system. And I was wondering if you are familiar with what the metaphysics teach.
Nope. How's that?
So, someone's raising his hand.
Again, it depends on where you are and what you're doing.
Sure.
I'm a psychiatric social worker, and if I'm in that job, I got to be open to what people are telling me, even if it sounds like it's from Mars, because it might be from Mars. You just never have to be careful about this stuff. So if there's some mystical stuff showing up in session, I'm smart to pay attention to what they're saying and where they're going with it, and not spend time trying to get them somewhere else.
Yep. So in some ways, you could compare part of that metaphysical tradition, Tess, more with the Eastern tradition of the church, because it's all about mystery and connecting to God through other means. So I guess in some ways that there would be some similarities there, but I've never personally had that kind of interaction with a metaphysical church, so I can't speak to it.
I was going to say also something about the Eastern Christendom or Orthodox type of belief system, and from what I understand, I thought they were more in line with, and I know that you were trying to stay away from the word conservative, but I understood that the Orthodox tradition or thought process was more in line with conservatism, in that they're against gays, because I had heard somewhere else that the Russian Orthodox Church is like anti-homosexuality.
So the Orthodox tradition is definitely more conservative in the way they do liturgy. So in that way, that's absolutely true. As somebody mentioned, in most Orthodox churches, the priest still has his, there are no hers, backs to the congregation, and which goes back to the Middle Ages in the Western tradition. They never gave that up. So from that standpoint, the liturgy is absolutely more traditional. There's no question about that. And I would say, generally speaking, on social issues, the Orthodox Church is more conservative. But again, that changes from place to place.
Is the Orthodox tradition, are they also more focused in their teaching and theology on the atonement as well? Because I thought I read something like that when I was doing an online search for Orthodox churches in Tucson.
Yep, generally speaking, yep. Okay.
Excuse me, could I just say, my experience of Orthodox churches is that since they tend to be nationally based, you get all kinds of cultural influence from whatever country that is sponsoring that church. And what I noticed in particular was that they tend to have a more optimistic view of human nature than many of the Western churches do. They believe that each of us has what they call an inner icon, which is a model of God inside the body.
Right.
And they also use icons, physical icons, which are pictures and such of saints, other holy ones. And they use those very much in their prayer lives and their worship services. And finally, I see a lot of optimism that I don't always see in the West, because instead of the bleeding Christ on the cross, you'll see the ruler of heaven depicted in that way, or instead of the suffering mother, Mary, she is the queen of heaven. So it's all very ideal and future-oriented, and all these radiant figures everywhere you look.
Yeah, thanks for that. The cultural makeup of Orthodox churches is incredibly important, and is the focus of much of what goes on in the Orthodox tradition. And we talked in our history part class about icons and how critical that way of worshiping is in the Orthodox tradition. Icons are seen as windows to the divine, and the way for you to connect with the divine as closely as possible. And obviously, we have plenty of icons in this church. But there are many Western churches that have walked totally away from the whole icon experience and find it to be popish, to go back to the words from the Reformation. But of course, that's another way that we're similar to the Eastern Church. Lisa?
Before we leave denominations, I'm not even sure I have it right, but there is, or to even call them a group, but there are folks who are calling themselves, I believe, Christian nationals or nationalists that are very much like the birds that you mentioned in your sermon this morning, that it's a false use of Christianity. And these people are speak overtly about being racist, anti-phobic, blah, 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 etc. And in my view, not really Christian at all. And when I hear them talk, I think of you, and I think you must just go crazy when you hear them talk, because it's so very false about Christianity.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too pejorative here, but I think Christian nationalism as a whole is a political movement that uses Christianity as a way to get to where they want to go. I have trouble. Yeah, okay. Good. Sandy?
I do think, though, there's been huge growth in people as the churches commingle and the ideas commingle.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot of things about how the Episcopal Church works when I came here, that my congregational back went up. And but more things that I thought, I really, really like that. I think that's really me. I think one of the huge differences in churches is how authority is held, because it makes a difference if authority is completely within the congregation. And there are some big problems with that, but there's some advantages.
You bet.
Here, the congregation needs to balance with clergy and bishops and all that stuff. And there are some huge problems with that, and there are some advantages. And I love the interaction that's happening. I think as someone who's been seeking all my life, I find more by learning about the other denominations. And this is only slightly off topic, Steve, but it's the openness that I have found here to making those explorations and then holding on to them, whether it's Episcopalian or not, that drew me to want to stay here. It's a great place.
Well, that's actually
Commercial over.
your whole statement, though, was actually a great segue into where I want to go, which is, are we entering some sort of post-denominational age? Are we getting close to the place where those differences are not terribly important? That our polity differences are a major thing. Is it possible that all the mainline churches could come together in some form to create this whole wider thing? I think there are lots of issues around that. One is polity. The other is the way we worship, and I don't know what the answers are there, but some of the movements that are going on in the church, I think was it last week we talked about Phyllis Tickle's book, The Great Emergence. I totally believe that we are in a new emerging thing in the church now. A lot of people are talking about the fact that some people are saying the church is dying because we have less people and older people in churches. I don't personally think we have to worry about the church dying. I think, though, it needs to become something very different than it was. And we were very much trying to do that here at Grace St. Paul's. Where that takes us is difficult to tell. The two movements that have happened over the last 20 years that have similar names that we can talk about is something called the emergent church and the emerging church. And the emergent church was a movement to try to create a way of doing church that was new for a new age, that brought all of these folks together under one roof. But I got to tell you what happened in that. It was very beautiful when we saw this developing and what this looked like. But what usually happened in new churches that were calling themselves an emergent church was that people said, so how are we going to worship? And they all pulled from their own traditions and backgrounds and said, we should worship, we should throw this out and we should keep this. And they kept putting it all together. And in the emergent churches that I've experienced, what usually happened was they said, okay, this week we're going to do a Disciples of Christ service. And next week we're going to do a Lutheran service. And then we're going to do, because letting go of our ancient tradition and how we've worshiped for 2,000 years, I don't think is the answer to anything. We need to make it speak to people now in the 21st century, but I think holding on to that's important. And I appreciate all these movements that are trying to make this happen. The emerging church movement was a little different, and I would call us an emerging church. And I think I brought up Diana Butler Bass's book, Christianity for the Rest of Us. She did a social analysis of a lot of emerging churches, and she came up with 10 things that all of these churches that were growing exponentially and were becoming this new thing were all about. And all 10 of them are things that we're doing at Grace St. Paul's. And all of those things are connecting those of us in the mainline tradition together in ways that we weren't before. So the fact that I'm having an experience with other pastors from other denominations on a regular basis, I think is helpful, because we're sharing all of those things together, and we'll say, hey, I found this really cool liturgical site that's doing this stuff. And the more we talk like that, the more our services are starting to look a little bit more like each other, and the more that we're experiencing other things, and we're learning things from each other that we weren't before. So I personally don't know if that's ever going to mean that Presbyterians and Episcopalians are going to merge into one thing, because because of human nature, I just don't know if that's going to happen. But we are learning from each other, and we're more like each other all the time. So, and I got to tell you, I am so grateful for the other pastors that I'm doing that with in town, because of all those experiences and how much we're learning from each other. And I find it so much more helpful than being in a group of Episcopal priests, because we're all doing the same thing, and we're all thinking the same way, and it's not helping us grow into where we need to go as the church. So, don't tell the bishop I said that, but I'm just, it doesn't move me the way being with other folks are. So, that was one of the reasons that we brought Kimberly Law here, because I wanted somebody from a different tradition to be part of what we were doing. It's why I'm so grateful that Edwin's here. He's opening our eyes to things that we wouldn't have seen otherwise, and that makes me so happy and so grateful. And the more we get to do those kind of things, the more I think we're going to grow. Can we close this evangelical mainline gap? It's going to be really hard, but we're a heck of a lot closer today than we were even 2 years ago. There are things that are coming together, and Edwin is a perfect example of that. Go, Edwin.
Something I was going to share about my experience at Oral Roberts, for those of you who don't know, I was there during my undergraduate years, is a lot of my friends who grew up evangelical or Pentecostal in some tradition or denomination like that. Once we got to ORU, a lot of us explored, myself included, and I think I've seen a lot of interest for those who grew up exclusively evangelical to be drawn to more liturgical traditions. So I would see, we would have prayer services and people would bring icons or rosaries.
Yeah.
And this is at ORU. And I'm kind of seeing the same thing too in seminary, where my friends who grew up mainline are curious and want to learn from evangelical or Pentecostal traditions. So I've seen pockets of it. I know it's usually not the thing that's at the front or that's being projected, but it is there amongst like my generation and certainly like my peers, where I think a lot of us are just crossing over. We're not leaving behind our tradition.
Right.
We're bringing it with us, and that really excites me.
Yeah, thanks, Edwin. Thanks for bringing that up. That makes me think of a couple ecumenical deals that I went to with a group of folks, and I remember one of them was focused on music, and I was just looking for new ways to open up what we're doing musically. I think I'm gonna push Christina for us to do a jazz Eucharist here, maybe at Pentecost. But anyway, that's a different story. So we were looking at different ways to approach this, and the evangelical pastors that were there, I specifically remember one of them getting up and saying, I've discovered this amazing thing. You're not going to believe this. And they talked about a liturgical practice that led to communion. And I'm sitting here going, oh my gosh. So, but then we started talking to one another, and they were using a liturgical kind of experience like they never had before. There are evangelical churches now doing things like we do in the lectionary and in the seasons of the year. There are evangelicals that are doing Lent now and Advent and all kinds of things like that. And we're learning more about how to be more open to the Spirit and more aware of this whole emotional part of what we're doing as a church. So that really, really heartens me. And I think some of you know that Edwin led our vestry retreat a few weeks ago, and that was the whole point of what we were doing. We're specifically looking at why we cannot break this Western European cultural thing here, and we're working really, really hard on that and trying to figure that out. And that's what we were talking about, is how we open ourselves to all these other experiences.
Did you talk at all about reclaiming some of the stuff as far back as everything that went out of the United Christian tradition into Eastern Christendom, like staring at an icon?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
I was caused to do that once, and my turn came in the middle of the night. It was quite an amazing experience.
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't talk about that at that retreat, but absolutely, we are doing that. Yep. The Andrei Rublev's icon of the Trinity, which many of you have seen and know about, I think is one of the wonderful things that connects us together in the Eastern and Western tradition. And having that kind of experience of a living God through an icon is really something we don't want to let go of, I don't think. So I have no answers to any of those, and in typical Anglican fashion, I don't know where that's going to take us and what we're going to do, but I am very heartened by the things that Edwin brought up, and the fact that somebody who went to ORU is sitting in our pews right now, and we are making that all that merge together. We also talked about whether we wanted to bring Carlton Pearson here. After that session, I had numerous people ask me if we could bring him here. Okay. Tell him who Carlton Pearson is after Lisa goes. Okay, go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead.
I sense we're getting close to stopping.
We're getting close.
And I just want to point out, and maybe you've all noticed, but if you look on the wall, there are several, on each side, steps to the cross with Christ's hands being expressed artistically. And they were done by an artist in town whose name was Colby Fee. And I think she's done a beautiful job, but it's absolutely appropriate to take a look at these, especially during this season, this time, because that's exactly what it's about.
Thank you.
And they're on both sides, steps to the cross.
Okay.
She did that about 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago.
Okay. Did you want to tell them who Carlton Pearson is? Sure. Thank you.
So feel free to Google his name. You can also find a biopic on Netflix called Come Sunday.
It's a very good movie.
Yeah. So if you kind of want to know who my influences or role models are, Father Steve is one of them. And then another name is Carlton Pearson and Rob Bell. but I'll focus on Carlton Pearson for now. Carlton Pearson was an African-American Pentecostal preacher who also went to ORU, so we both got our starts at ORU. And during that time, Oral Roberts was still alive, and he was the president of the university. Carlton caught his eye, and he became his spiritual mentor, kind of like his right hand. And Carlton was a really big name in the church world. In fact, he was a spiritual advisor to several presidential administrations. That's how big he was. And he had a fairly large gathering or following, and then he questioned the idea of the afterlife. He had a revelation while he was watching the news late at night with one of his children sitting beside him. And shortly thereafter, he lost everything. He, didn't have like an extramarital affair, didn't embezzle money. He just simply asked a question. And because of that, his church ended up closing down, but while it was on the verge of closing, the very same people he would preach against were the people that brought over their offering, the Unitarian Universalists.
Yeah, there you go.
He ended up, long story short, being drawn to the UU tradition and is now a member on staff at All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's kind of like the flagship church for the UU tradition. And I got to meet him, and I've got to have dinner with him several times. He's a really great guy, and yeah, we should definitely try to bring him. I think it would be great if he could share his experience and also to reconnect with him, because I haven't spoken to him in years. I mostly just follow him on Facebook now, but I still have his number, unless he changed it.
All right, cool. So those are the kind of bridge people that we're always looking to connect with, people that have experienced the church from a totally different place, and those are the kind of folks that we want to make all those connections with. The Rob Bells of the world who have been there and come out the other side, and any way that we can find to connect and create those kinds of connections is a good thing as far as I'm concerned, and I look forward to that. May I tell this group what's happening with a couple of you next Sunday? Yes? Yes? Okay. So Elizabeth and Patsy are being baptized on Easter Sunday. So just wanted to make sure you all knew that. So that will happen at our 10 o'clock service next week. And it'll be very, very fun. So looking forward to that. And then is the sheet around? Does anybody else need to sign the sheet for reception or confirmation? Sandy, you do? Yeah, okay. All right. Okay. So the bishop's visit again is April 30th, and she'll be here for both services, of course, and we will do confirmation and reception at the 10 o'clock service, okay? So everybody that's on the list, if you have any questions about that, let me know. It's going to be a great, great day. It looks like we have 20-some folks on the list right now, so that'll be a great, fun, wonderful day. So, okay, everybody got that? Okay. What else? We're at the end, so if you have any more burning thoughts or questions, this is the time. I'm so grateful to all of you for being a part of this for 6 whole weeks and doing all this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been great having you all. You have great questions, and I'm so excited about where we're going as a church. So. Okay. Anything else? Thank you all so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.